Sweet Home is a turn-based horror JRPG developed and published by Capcom on the Famicom in 1989. It was directed by Takuya Fujiwara, a designer of the arcade version of Ghouls and Ghosts. Producer credit goes to Yuzo Itami, who also served as producer of the Kiyoshi Kurosawa film the game is based on. Both the game and the film feature a hapless group of 5 documentary filmmakers investigating the mansion of artist Ichirou and Mamiya. Their intent is to discover and document the frescoes he was working on before his mysterious death. Unbeknownst to the group, Ichirou's wife is haunting the mansion and traps them all in a fit of rage. Only together can they exorcise the ghost of Lady Mamiya and find escape. The idea of an adaptation between mediums is to figure out the core of a work and then translate it into a new form. This new form will then adhere to the inherent strengths and weaknesses of the chosen medium, often ending up as something quite different from its source. Adding another dimension to the mix is that this process rarely concerns the original creator directly. Instead, someone else will make their interpretation of the work and then apply that to the new adaptation. This is a big challenge, as few adaptations get the same resources as the original, often serving as little more than extended advertising. But every so often, the molded by the numbers book adaptations of popular movies or hollow anime desperate to get you to buy light novels give way to something truly transformative that may overshadow the original thing. Our topic du jour is Sweet Home, a tiny little game based on an obscure haunted house movie, neither of which are what I would consider financial juggernauts. But we are not here to please money men, we are here to talk about art. On that note, Sweet Home is a delightful and kinda weird movie, but it didn't move the needle the way the Amityville Horror did a decade prior. There are multiple reasons for this, but one does not come to me for the history of filmmaking, so let's focus on the key cultural difference between the movie and its adaptation. Sweet Home the film is one haunted house movie among many, but Sweet Home the game is an innovative trailblazer that's paradoxically still very unique to this day and yet highly influential. Between progenitors like Haunted House on Atari 2600 and Friday the 13th on NES, you can certainly see the burgeoning desire for a pinch-hitting virtual experience. But escaping the shadow of the arcades was more on the agenda for most home game releases, which is why even explicitly horror-themed games like Castlevania competed using heavy action elements. It's easy to see why this was the case, since horror is highly dependent on immersion and audiovisual stimuli, things available in scant supply on an 8-bit gaming device. So before the genre got its first real shot in the arm a few years later, pickings were slim. This is why I find Sweet Home such an entrancing piece of work. Despite the heavy limitations placed upon it being both an adaptation and an 8-bit title, it manages to create a mechanically strong and audiovisually sound experience. Being long separated from its moment in time, I don't find the game scary, but it really sells you on the horror of being stuck in a haunted mansion and trying to survive. And despite that being a decade-old conceit in the world of cinema, it proved to be a fresh hell in the gaming world. Which did come at the cost of character writing, but something else was found in its place, missing a limb or two. As fate would have it, Sweet Home the film is openly available on YouTube at the time of writing, but in case the Japanese copyright machine catches wind of it, allow me to offer a quick summary before we move on to how the game handles the same story. Our unlucky TV crew consists of bumbling producer Kazuo Hoshino and his behatted daughter Emi, who is hellbent on playing matchmaker between her dad and director Akiko Hayakawa. Rounding out the crew is numbskull cameraman Ryu Taguchi and the oddball reporter Asuka. While setting up the shoot inside the mansion, Taguchi inadvertently sets the film in motion by disrupting the memorial keeping all the horrors at bay so he can access the generator room. Work begins on restoring and documenting the fresco they find, but the dark history of the mansion soon makes itself known. Additional frescoes suddenly appear, showing flames and a baby-sized coffin. They eventually realize that a baby burned to death, which causes Asuka to freak out. This moment of despair seemingly connects her to the house, as Asuka soon becomes possessed and goes outside to dig up the baby. Come morning, Akiko goes to fetch some gas and runs into Kenichi Yamamura, a local mechanic. After saving him from getting crushed by a car, Akiko lets it slip that they're shooting at the Mamiya mansion. This gets a reaction out of Yamamura, but Akiko speeds off before he can stop her. Back at the mansion, the dead baby is discovered by the others, instigating an impromptu burial that causes Asuka to run away and break the car. After waking up, Asuka makes her way to Taguchi, at which point the shadows of the mansion attack. Asuka runs away, but when she returns, she discovers that Taguchi has been burned in half by the shadows. This naturally causes Asuka to freak out, so she kills him with a wrench and then gets hit with the Chekhov's axe that Taguchi set aside earlier. Outside, the remainder of the crew gets berated by Yamamura for breaking the monument protecting against the curse, but before he can stop them, they go back inside to look for Asuka and Taguchi. Once they've been found, Emi becomes possessed, leading to Kazuo getting attacked. Once he recovers, Yamamura outlines the story of the Mamiya family. 30 years ago, the Mamiya couple had a baby whose growth and development Ichirou intended to display over multiple frescoes. But one day, when Lady Mamiya went to turn on the furnace, she discovered in horror that the baby had been playing inside of it. This being completely natural for an infant to do, Lady Mamiya cursed her lack of foresight and reached into the furnace to save her baby. It was for naught, and she lost an eye in the process. After the incident, Lady Mamiya began kidnapping babies throughout the area and tossed them into the furnace to give her baby playmates in the afterlife. The locals soon caught wind of this and cornered her, at which point she threw herself into the furnace. Ichirou kept on drawing, but soon died as well. Yamamura then mentions that light isn't enough to defeat Lady Mamiya and that they instead need the power of the mind. He demonstrates this by singing a song for 2 minutes straight, which somehow gives him the power to crush and deform a glass bottle with one hand. It's a very good scene. In high spirits after the magic trick, the team goes down into the basement to rescue Emi. Yamamura enters Lady Mamiya's domain and manages the deed at the cost of becoming a skeleton in an amazing display of practical effects. His sacrifice is for nothing, as Lady Mamiya catches Emi again just as they're about to escape. Kazuo then runs back in, disappearing for the remainder of the film. Akiko, on the other hand, plans to trade the baby for Emi, so she puts on a dress that belonged to Emi's dead mother and prays that it will give her the power of the mind. Back downstairs, she finds Emi inside the furnace and uses her psychic powers to prove that she'll be a good stepmom and braves the flames inside. After getting Emi out, Lady Mamiya suddenly appears to confront the two while undergoing a sick transformation showing all the baby souls caught under her skin. Akiko gets fed up after a while and tries to stab Lady Mamiya with a pitchfork to no avail. Emi then rushes in to offer the baby instead, which calms down the monster. Overcome with maternal love, Lady Mamiya summons the melancholic main theme, gets forgiven by the screenwriter for all those dead babies, and flies up straight into heaven. Relieved to be done with their final boss fight, Emi and Akiko stumble out of the mansion with the former wondering what happened to Kazuo. As soon as Akiko starts consoling her, we see Kazuo falling out of a goddamn cupboard after having dodged the entire climax of the film. They then reunite outside in joy and we see the mansion collapse, signifying that the resident ghost of Mamiya Mansion is finally gone. As you've probably picked up on, Sweet Home is a goofy movie, but it's the charming sort of goofy, aided by the gruesome special effects, creating a beginner-friendly haunted house movie with some unique appeal. Especially since it's a Japanese film set in a Western-style mansion, making for a neat bit of contrast here and there. The core theme is motherhood, which transforms Lady Mamiya into a harmful monster thanks to her grief, and later restores her once Akiko has awakened to it herself and been driven to rescue Emi. On its face, I find Yamamura belittling Akiko and calling her effectively worthless for not having a child to be kind of icky and natalistic, but given what happens in the furnace, I'm willing to give his words a kinder reading. The final confrontation is one between ancient hatred born of tragedy and jealousy versus newfound love, proving that Akiko has the maternal qualities needed to protect Emi and become her new mother. Lady Mamiya ultimately being defeated by reminding her of the love that drove her to evil in the first place is a great way to end things, but the optics of sending her to heaven after committing mass infanticide really doesn't sit right with me. Neither does Kazuo's whole deal during the climax. He obviously cares about his daughter immensely and fights tooth and nail to rescue her, but using his ineptitude to write him out of the film at the end just feels lazy. Leaving room for the maternal showdown was the right choice, but not having Kazuo show up to rescue Akiko and Emi and prove that they all need each other as a family is a missed opportunity. As it stands, all Kazuo really does is exhibit the virtue of a good Columbo cosplay. To judge the game's take on the story, we need to consider any changes made to the genre, tone, theme, and plot. The haunted house genre remains the same of course, but the tone has undergone a noticeable shift. Unlike its point of origin, the game is fully focused on the horror, without any levity. The ironic thing there is that the movie still comes off as the scarier of the two, despite being so silly. I chalk that up entirely to the audiovisual power gap between a Famicom game and a feature film, something I bet kept the staff at Capcom motivated to improve their technology in the following decades. The plot has also been modified, featuring major changes to the narrative to better facilitate gameplay. The first change is that the events of the movie are compressed into that initial visit to the mansion, making escape the player's motivation the entire time. Good thing too, as the second and larger change really takes away from the main theme of the film and the development between Akiko and Emi. Once the intro cutscene showcasing Lady Mamiya sealing everyone inside has played, everybody's characterization gives up the ghost, meaning every character is now effectively identical. So no matter who you play, the remaining dialogue will be the same for everyone, and there is no plot-driven dialogue between player characters. This is done to keep the game's scope in check while allowing for the permadeath mechanic. It's a game-wide challenge by the designers, daring you to earn yourself a happier ending than the one in the film by having everyone survive. But unless you are very keen on role-playing and using the emergent gameplay systems to tell your own story, there isn't much of a narrative for most of the game. What is here, though, is the first proper example of environmental storytelling I can think of. Strewn about the mansion, you find various notes written by people who died before you and provide hints on what to do. The multitude of frescoes in the mansion do the same thing, with their story material focusing on the Mamiya family's tragedy. And while it is satisfying to learn the main backstory of the mansion like this, the previous victims are very flat characters and I wouldn't ever be able to tell you who they were or why they were even here. Given the very real text storage budget of an 8-bit cartridge, it isn't surprising that this is the case, but I wish there was more to them if our player characters have to be so disconnected from their own narrative. The one thing of note I did glean is that the memorial preventing the curse was disturbed before the game began. Which makes sense, the curse needs to be active for all this carnage to occur beforehand. You still find it weirdly intact and need to define it a second time for a key, but it's a memorable visual from the movie, so I think it's excusable. After getting the key, Yamamura shows up to introduce himself. Him and your current character then engage in a proper 8-bit walk and talk sequence where he tells you he's been stuck here for a long time and that the team needs to find the baby's coffin in the basement. He then gets unceremoniously clobbered lest you think you have earned yourself a new party member. After running into some guy in the basement who has a very Minecrafty solution to the local lake of fire, we get a game-exclusive 1-2 punch telling you why Nintendo of America wouldn't even think of localizing this. When you get to the furnace, your lead hears the voice of a child burning alive with a nearby doll punctuating the moment. It doesn't hit as well as it should given the subject matter, but this is exactly the sort of opportunity an adaptation should gun for, showing another perspective on the same material to give it fresh impact. Another such addition is Ichirou's diary, a clever way of characterizing him and showing that he actually opposed his wife, something the movie doesn't go into at all. But not all additions are good, as the sanctuary features a plot hole in the form of a servant's quarters. Unless the servants are undead or ghosts clinging to their previous existence using illusions, it makes absolutely no sense for them to still be here after 30 years. The presence of a skeleton in the room contrasting the people makes me assume they're meant to be alive, but I'm probably giving this more thought than the devs did. Yamamura shows up again and guides the team towards Lady Mamiya's room guarded by a servant loyal to Ichirou. Once past him, the game bans for the fences and actually adapts Yamamura's death scene to the best of the Famicom's abilities. It goes by much too fast, lasting only a fraction of the original scene's duration, but hats off to the team for melting a guy's face off on the Famicom. That's one for the history books. One more change from the movie is that Lady Mamiya actively talks to your characters throughout the game, which you can see here during this failed initial confrontation. It gives the impression that she isn't as far gone as in the movie, but it's obviously a concession made to give the game a more tangible antagonist. Compare this to the film where she only talks through the people she possesses and then pops up with almost zero warning during the climax. Following some more dungeon crawling, it comes time to seek out Lady Mamiya in her outer dimension. Inside, the team is met by demonic clones of themselves who don't serve a narrative purpose at all. But you do get the voice of Yamamura from beyond the grave telling you how to bring down Lady Mamiya using prayer and a set of 4 items in the correct order. Unlike the movie where she just needs her baby returned, the game version of the confrontation is what I can best describe as a systematic teardown of a person's entire being masquerading as an exorcism. Throwing away Akiko's and Emi's development, it's more an exploration of cooperation, with each party member kept alive making things easier and a minimum of 2 being needed to fight. Each time you attack, the party member in question screams at Lady Mamiya, telling her to rest in peace, declaring that the suffering must end or that her child is dead. Once she is sufficiently pissed off, she opens herself up to being blasted by Yamamura's amulet, marking the first quarter of the fight done. Then she says that she's living here happily, which is your opportunity to present evidence to the contrary in the form of a family photo. Then your party hammers in the point that she's no longer alive until she gets a moment of clarity. This is your chance to blast her with a prey attack, triggering phase 2. There sadly isn't a crazy transformation sequence, but the fight ramps up in intensity and has you show that her husband obviously didn't love her after the murder spree began. The final nail in the coffin is of course giving her the baby coffin, which ends the fight after one last prayer. Right here at the ending, the game throws a curveball by saying that Yamamura is Ichirou and Mamiya. The movie doesn't really imply it directly, but his first name is shown to be Kenichi, and he does know the entire story of the mansion, so it is a reveal that slots into place and gives the characters some more layers. Sure does more for the narrative than the best ending does. The rest of the endings don't amount to much, with all of them depicting grief over the lives lost without having the survivors react to the people in question. Had it been more feasible, here would have been the perfect time to showcase the relationships between the characters as they mourn each other. But let's not get lost in hypotheticals and circle back to that final encounter for a bit. In the movie, exorcising Lady Mamiya is a gentle pleading act that follows Akiko's desperate and ineffectual attacks. This frames love and understanding as the only way to get past Lady Mamiya's twisted form and lead her into the afterlife where she can find peace. But here, with the confrontation filtered through the game's combat system, it is instead a violent and ugly fight, with both parties screaming bloody murder at each other until one falls. I don't begrudge Capcom for making a unique final boss tied to the player's ability to play the game and comprehend the story they're experiencing, but if you've ever seen someone dismiss video games as violent schlock, this is why. Violence is easy to systemize for a game, spur-of-the-moment acts of tenderness or not. I'm all for exciting final bosses, but it's worth thinking about the exact emotional state a player is left with once credits roll. It is also worth thinking about how fun it is to beat undead dogs with mallets, so let's look at the combat system. Being a very experimental game, you would hope that Sweet Home would make battling its random encounters more engaging than its contemporaries. And while that is true for the mechanics connected to these battles, actual fighting is little more than a numbers game with some minor dice rolls. Said dice rolls can screw you over in fun ways, but let's start with the basics. When battle begins, you are presented with 5 options. Your normal attacks are divided into physical and spiritual components, with enemies being weak to one or the other, and weapons deciding in what direction each character leans. Generally speaking, bigger numbers are better numbers, so as long as you level up and collect new weapons, you will survive just fine spamming normal attacks. But sometimes you find yourself in a pinch needing to conserve health, which is where the other options come in. Running away is often reliable but not guaranteed, which is good balance for a horror game. Pray is the game's magic system, which eschews the familiar fireballs for something simpler with its own twist. When selected, the prayer bar appears, which is a little action minigame that dictates how strong your attack will be and how many prayer points it will cost in linear fashion. The higher your level, the more prayer points you're allowed to spend to augment your regular attack with spiritual power. The challenge here is to bet on how many points you need to win the fight, as overkilling the enemy just means you have wasted precious prayer points. The minigame adds a bit more tension as you can accidentally undershoot or overshoot your target, but it's still pretty easy. And that goes for battles in general too, as the party has large health bars to work with and always gets a full turn before the enemy does. So if your current team can kill nearby monsters in that one turn, you're almost free of danger. And if you can't, you can spend prayer points in order to get safe level ups and weapons until you're able to do so. But you can't run dry, as prayer is also needed to solve puzzles and to rescue captured party members mid-fight. If you don't have points to spare, your only options are to beat them to death alongside the monster, run away and leave them frozen, or call for help from someone who can still pray. Since Sweet Home subscribes to the Scooby-Doo school of haunted house exploration, the maximum team size is 3, meaning the party will always be split up to some degree unless 2 people are just dead. But in battle, you can spend a character's turn to call out to another person, who then gets a handful of seconds to bring their team into the fight, temporarily giving you more bodies to work with. This means that if you know the enemy will get at least one turn no matter what, it is always worth it to bring in your second team so you have all 5 people available on your next turn. This is one of many ways in which the game encourages togetherness and cooperation, as not only do you get 5 attacks per turn afterwards, but everyone gets full XP and you can perform a full group heal as well. Of course, that last thing comes with some heavy caveats. Inventory space is limited to 1 weapon, 1 personal item, and 2 generic items per person. And the precious tonics, your singular source of health restoration, not only take up space needed for other items, but are also limited throughout the game. I believe there are only 21 of them in total, which is more than what an experienced player needs, but if you aren't comfortable keeping one character at low health until the others have taken more damage, you might end up using them up too soon. There is a hidden dress in the late game that provides infinite prayer points as a sort of failsafe, but before you find it, if you do, caution is necessary. To give you a leg up on the resource conservation anxiety, the game is quick to tell you that Kazuo's lighter and Taguchi's camera can be used against maggots and bats respectively to deal critical damage. This assures that even if you aren't quick to understand a pretty awful method of comparing weapons and swapping them out, you still have a fair chance of making the first area safe by leveling up. Past that point, there are a few more attack items of decreasing importance. The mallet is the best one, as it not only serves as a puzzle item but also works on many enemies, two of which are very tanky upon discovery. But after that you have the pipe, which is only really useful against a single enemy type. I think it's meant as a physical supplement for people with spiritual weapons, but in practice it's a waste of space. Last one is the gem, a throwaway puzzle item you are later told serves as a strong general use weapon. Which is true, when you pick it up for the first time. By the time the game tells you to use it in a fight, I'd argue it isn't needed anymore. Still a neat little secret offering some replay value, but your inventory is better filled with insurance against the many traps and dangers of the mansion determined to pick off your characters one by one. Despite random encounters being omnipresent throughout the game and them being your main source of danger, it's only when taken together with the rest of the interconnected exploration mechanics that you will feel truly threatened. When the game begins, your first challenge is learning that each character holds their own personal item, 3 of which are required for progression and 2 of which are technically optional if you have played the game already or get impossibly lucky while fighting. You are faced with 2 tiles of glass shards, which block your path unless Asuka vacuums them up. Then, before leaving, the game gives you a very direct tutorial on teaming up characters and helpfully guides you to an open door. In there you find a starter weapon, a tonic, a candle, and a note by Ichirou telling you to photograph his frescoes for clues using Taguchi's camera. Doing so reveals that the frescoes are grouped together in 3s by month. This offers a timeline for the background events of the story, but most of them offer hints to the puzzles. Back the other way is a locked door followed by a rope, clear the way by Emi's key and Kazuo's lighter. Already the game has taught you what 4 of the personal items are for, but with the arrival of random encounters, Akiko's remedy bag gets its time in the limelight too. If you're unlucky, the most basic enemy type in the game, the evil doll, will freeze someone in place here and teach you about status effects. They will thankfully only take hold outside of combat, as they're intended to split up the team or punish you for not keeping everyone together for quick healing. Something which can prove difficult, as the corridor is also haunted by ghosts who spirit away every party member they touch, with a bigger team naturally being worse at avoiding them. A lone character who got separated isn't in any danger from random battles if they stand still, but then you will have to put together a rescue team in order to backtrack and save them. And if your rescue team is composed of 3 people to minimize battle damage, then you have to leave someone else behind and risk them also getting caught if you left them in a haunted room. Another option is to willingly spirit away more people, but that can lead to more risky battles and depending on the situation could get them sent to another room entirely. And we're still only talking about regular movement here. To actually make progress within the mansion, you also need special equipment or single-use items. This tutorial area is a great little microcosm of what I'm talking about, as you end up in a dark room next to a chasm. While you can move around in the dark and see items, the candle from earlier gives you a nice set of 5x5 visible squares to work with. I think of this as a comfort item, something that isn't required but makes things much easier at the cost of precious inventory space. But to lay claim to the optional weapon hidden away here, you also need to lay down a wooden board as a makeshift bridge. This is a consumable item that can endure a random amount of uses before it breaks, so if you want to be safe from falling, you have to ditch 1 or 2 people and make a quick trip understaffed, risking a nasty fight. If someone falls, they're out of commission and slowly losing health until they get pulled up again. Fail to get there in time and they're dead forever. Naturally, all of these systems alongside a multitude of traps interconnect to screw you over together and make up the core challenge of getting through the mansion with everyone alive. It probably sounds awful to the modern ear, but let me be clear about this. The game isn't actually that hard. In fact, it is quite the elegant piece of design. It preys on your fear and wants you to make bad decisions by becoming impatient, but if you take in your surroundings, plan ahead and remember the status of everyone in the party, it's quite breezy. By mechanics alone, the game reinforces its own main theme of teamwork and even allows for emergent storytelling to take place. As an example, in my recent playthrough, Emmy was the one who got spirited away most often, which would probably put a strain on her relationship with her dad. But then, during a critical moment late in the game, Kazuo was the one who got spirited away instead. It was then up to Emmy and Akiko to brave the danger and go find him, which led to Emmy getting cursed while swimming, forcing Akiko to save her from a pit of spikes. Both of them then got spirited away, landing all over the mansion and needing to tenderize some early game monsters alone before they could go and rescue Kazuo, who was stuck behind a wooden board with unknown durability left. Turns out he could have just made it the entire time, but I, and by extension him, were too scared to risk it. It was a downright magical moment of hostile game mechanics accidentally coming together to create perfectly in-character drama. I'm very glad I got it on camera and might have actually preferred it if the movie did something similar. All this happened at the point in the game where the kid gloves come off and you'll be tempted to abuse the save system. The game may only have a single save slot, but you can save anywhere and take on each room on its own terms. I wanted a cleaner experience this time around and only saved a minimal amount. I challenge you to do the same for the early parts, since allowing the mechanics to run their course really adds to the experience, but once enemies start being able to blow characters away multiple rooms mid-fight, I won't begrudge anyone for save scumming. Especially since a dead character not only lessens the party's ability to fight, but also means that you have to find a replacement for their personal item and keep it in your now dwindled inventory. Where things really take a turn for the assholish are the sand traps. Only the first one has anything of value, with the remaining two only existing to ruin your day. To escape them, you need a second character with a bow or a rope who then needs to very precisely hit the character rolling around in the dry death toilet. It's a tense situation that builds on the traps that came before as a sort of ultimate exam, but there comes a point where people expecting turn-based gameplay aren't so hot on surprise action elements that can lead to instant death. The quicktime events in the game, which might also be a historical first alongside the notes depending on how you define things, are a nicer way of exploring the same idea of surprise action gameplay. But they have the opposite issue where the things flying at you often miss, and when they do hit, deal a pitiful amount of damage. Even so, I find them charming thanks to the mix of the help and enemy encounter themes acting as build-up. The composer was faced with the hardy challenge of making atmospheric music on the Famicom, with the end result sometimes running into the absolute limit of what the sound chip can handle. That's not to say that there aren't some songs that completely nail it though. But then you have the Caverns theme, which is just nothing. something which does at least contrast well with the panic-inducing help song. Overall, it's a good soundtrack, but you can really feel these compositions cry out for better instrumentation. While the game wasn't given the CD-based remake this music deserves, there was an official arrangement album that gives these songs a noticeable upgrade. It's pretty transformative, so I recommend tracking down that version of the soundtrack if you can. The visuals are in a similar spot, having some obvious limitations like a minimalistic menu and an extra big black bar on the left to minimize traversal flicker. But looking past that, the game is pretty much a visual feast. The environments have been carefully designed, featuring tilted walls and static shadows to sell the illusion of 3D space. Many of the areas still end up too bright for a horror game though, with the basement feeling like an ice level from Commander Keen. Still, when the game fires on all cylinders, it's kind of crazy. Trudging around in the dark by candlelight is pretty good, if a bit vanilla since they merely stop rendering the background without using any gradients. But then I noticed that in areas with lightning strikes, the flash actually lights up the environment properly. That is way beyond what anyone would expect on this hardware, but I love that they found a way to do it anyway. Same goes for all of the first-person scenes, like this door-opening animation. Anytime you run into something important and interactive in the environment, the game presents you with these highly detailed scenes that are often animated or at least change when you solve the puzzle. But what is more immersive and interactive than fighting for your life to this fun battle theme? While not all enemies are animated, and there are some palette swaps that drag the roster down, it cannot be overstated how great these graphics are for the system. And the music building up to a jump scare each time something attacks is just the cherry on top. To bring it all full circle, the final phase of the final boss calls back to this basic enemy encounter theme before you send her back to the afterlife and escape this lovable hellhole. Sweet Home is a testament to the power of human creativity when faced with harsh limitations. In a sea of garbage licensed games on the platform, the team over at Capcom rose to the occasion and managed to deliver a standout adaptation and codified an entire genre while doing so. It's a game that delivers on the fantasy of being in a haunted house movie, challenging the player to be more competent than the average horror movie character. But in doing so, the game shows that it isn't always easy to make the right choice in a stressful situation, not to mention that sometimes you're just dealt a shitty hand and have to do your best. Being a bit idealistic, I think it's a game that can help someone learn to empathize with people put in horrific circumstances and show that perfection isn't attainable, but that it's still something we should all strive for, both for our own sakes and for the sake of others. For as good as the game is, it still isn't perfect either. It's mostly linear despite not having much of a plot demanding it be that, so exploration and replay value feels limited. And for as much as I love their attempts at scaring the player, it just isn't good enough without scarier direction and better technology. Based on a haunted house movie though it may be, it remains the haunted house game I would point someone towards before they play its many successors. But if the game's age scares you off playing it more than its content does, I can offer a solution in the form of my Let's Play, as linked below. It not only shows off the entire game and all its endings, but is capped off with a full commentary track for the film. This was my first time producing such a thing, but I had fun and I hope it proves entertaining. Welcome to the set of Mad Max 4. We are currently missing 22 leather outfits and filming cannot continue without them. The staff is slowly going insane with boredom, competing with each other over who has the best hat. Emmy currently has the lead. Heikki Hechara, as a lovable idiot once said. multiple times. Now I'm just waiting for Patriarch Gondawara to pop out of that carriage and teach us all about respecting boundaries. This is how children kept themselves entertained before moon shoes were invented. That's hardcore. That'd be like if I made an analysis video without spending weeks agonizing over retakes. The resulting emotional turmoil is a key part of the creative process. Akiko-san, you should marry my dad. He's a real catch. He falls over all the time. Alright, that's 17 XP in the bag. She doesn't seem very happy about it. High on his first success, he instantly believes he can beat Mamiya single-handed, even though she's a ghost and a bitch, throwing babies like it's Yakuza 6. Yeah, blow the shit out of that model. Now that I've put Sweet Home on blast for not being scary, why don't you tell me what game terrified you for the first time? Bonus points if it wasn't even a horror game. I know I have my own personal vendetta against that godforsaken catfish in Ape Escape, but maybe someone out there has an even goofier childhood nemesis. Thank you for watching, and please make sure you're subscribed in time for the next episode. Whatever it might be.